The email landed like a stone in an empty well. Her face, framed by the smiling new partner, stared back from the firm's glossy announcement. Heartland Data Solutions, Senior Vice President. Not a word to me. The screen glowed, mocking the years, the plans, the money. Below the headline, a single sentence quoted her. I believe in building my own future, brick by brick. Hank Miller understood the unsexy side of investment. At Prairie Plains Investments in downtown Des Moines, he specialized in deep tech, the kind of foundational infrastructure that didn't grab headlines but kept the digital world humming. Fiber optics, industrial AI, robust data security protocols. He saw the solid ground beneath the flash. He looked for companies with strong bones, not just shiny promises. It was a philosophy that served him well, both professionally and, as he would later believe, personally. 3 years ago, a standard tech mixer at the city's convention center had introduced him to Sarah Jensen. She worked in business development at Heartland Data Solutions, a regional firm that managed enterprise data. The room buzzed with forced conversation and lukewarm networking. Hank was nursing a soda, listening to a pitch about blockchain for agricultural futures when she approached. Sarah had a way of cutting through the noise. She didn't just smile, she leaned in, her eyes sharp and curious. She asked questions that peeled back the layers of a presentation, getting to the core of a technology. Most people at these events wanted to talk about themselves. Sarah wanted to understand. Their initial conversation at the bar, amidst the clinking glasses and distant chatter, felt different. It flowed. One drink turned into two. The mixer ended, but they kept talking, moving from the convention center to a diner on Ingersoll Avenue. The sun was threatening to rise over the cornfields by the time they parted ways, having covered everything from the theoretical physics of quantum computing to their shared love for obscure science fiction novels. She knew her stuff, not just buzzwords. She was quick, articulate, and genuinely interested in the mechanics of how things worked, much like Hank himself. Their second date wasn't a date at all, not in the traditional sense. It was a local hackathon, a weekend-long coding marathon. Sarah had mentioned it casually, saying she was going to watch. Hank, on a whim, decided to join a team. He found her later, already elbow-deep in a whiteboard discussion, outlining an idea for a ridiculous cat meow translator app. He jumped in, offering structural suggestions, thinking about data architecture and user interfaces. They worked side by side for hours, fueled by lukewarm coffee and cold pizza, laughing quietly as their app took shape, translating a tabby's demands into "I require sustenance" or "pet me immediately." It was during one of these late-night coding sessions that Sarah looked at him, her brow furrowed in concentration, and said, "You understand the beauty in the building blocks, don't you, Hank? You see the poetry in the infrastructure." It was a simple observation, but it resonated. It felt like she saw him, truly saw the quiet passion he had for the unseen foundations. Within 6 months, the boxes were unpacked in their downtown loft, a sleek space with concrete floors and a wide view of the city. They were a power couple, or so their friends would say, each successful in their own right, carving out a life in the heartland tech scene. Weekends were spent at the farmers market. Evenings often involved quiet dinners, discussing market trends, new patents, or just the day's small events. The routine settled in, comfortable and predictable. Then came the conversation about her MBA. Sarah had always been ambitious, a quality Hank admired. She wanted to build something of her own, she explained one evening over takeout, something bigger than just business development for another company. Midwestern University offered a top-tier program. The cost, she admitted, was nearly $200,000. She mentioned it almost as an afterthought, a hurdle she was already planning to clear. Hank didn't hesitate. "I invest in potential we're living, Sarah," he said, looking across the table at her, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "And you have more potential than most startups in my portfolio. Consider this my personal investment in your future. Our future." The words came out easily, a natural extension of his professional ethos. He saw the logic, the sound return. A quiet pause stretched between them. Then Sarah reached across the table, her hand resting over his. "I'm going to make you proud, Hank. Just wait and see. We're going to build an empire together." Her voice was soft, laced with a gratitude that felt profound. It solidified something in Hank, a shared vision, a tangible plan for their life together. A few nights later, at their favorite Italian place, after a particularly good bottle of Chianti, Hank presented her with the check for the MBA of that program. Sarah took it, her smile wide. Then pulling a napkin from the dispenser, she uncapped his pen. On the white paper in her elegant script, she wrote, "Investment agreement. Sarah Jensen agrees to provide Hank Miller with infinite returns in the form of our shared future." Below it, she signed her name with a flourish. They toasted with champagne, clinking glasses. "To us, the best partnership in the Midwest tech scene." Hank still had the picture he took of that napkin, tucked away in a drawer. The first semester of Sarah's MBA program had been, as she often said, perfect. Her nightly calls to Hank were full of a bright, restless energy. She'd bubble over with details about her finance classes, the fascinating discussions in her marketing seminars, and the brilliant connections she was making. "You wouldn't believe the ideas these people have, Hank," she'd say, her voice tight with enthusiasm. "It's like drinking from a fire hose, but in the best way possible." Hank would listen, offering advice where he could, but mostly just absorbing her excitement. It felt good, a direct return on his investment, seeing her thrive, watching their shared future take shape in her animated descriptions. Weekends settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah would spread her textbooks across the dining table in their loft, her laptop open, while Hank worked through pitch decks from aspiring startups in his home office. The air would be filled with the quiet rustle of pages, the soft click of keyboards. Sometimes they'd break for coffee, debating the merits of a new open-source platform or the future of a renewable energy infrastructure. She was still Sarah, his partner, his sounding board, deeply engaged in the world they were building together. But as the second semester began, a gradual chill seemed to settle into their routine. Her calls started to shorten. The good nights became swifter, less lingered. The bubbling excitement softened into a more contained, almost professional tone. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the slow change of seasons. Conversations that once revolved around our future or our plans now often pivoted to my courses, my career, my new project group. Hank told himself it was normal. She was finding her way, developing an independent vision. This was, after all, precisely what he had invested in: her potential, her growth, her ability to build something formidable. Independence was a cornerstone of ambition, and he admired her drive. He knew the MBA program was rigorous, demanding. It made sense that her focus would narrow. He reasoned that she was simply maturing, stepping fully into the person she was meant to become. This intellectual rationalization quieted the small, insistent questions that began to prick at the edges of his mind. Then came the weekend trips. "My study group is heading to Chicago for a finance conference," she announced one Friday afternoon, her voice casual. "It's a great networking opportunity." Hank offered to drive her, thinking he could spend the weekend exploring the city. "Oh no, we're carpooling," she said quickly, a slight edge in her tone. "It's a whole group thing, just easier if we all stick together." He understood. Of course. Another time, it was a team retreat to a cabin by a lake, a strategy session for an upcoming business case competition. Again, Hank wasn't invited. He was always given a reason, a logical explanation that felt watertight on the surface, but left a faint, lingering dampness underneath. Missed dinners became more common. "I'm so sorry, Hank," she'd text, a string of emojis of tired faces following. "Late class presentation, just grabbing something quick with the group." Calls would go to voicemail, sometimes for hours, sometimes until the next morning. She was always in class, or at the library, or working on a project. He pictured her in the fluorescent glow of the university library, surrounded by books and focused students dedicated to her studies. The image was reassuring, but it didn't quite fill the empty chair at the dining table. After Sarah canceled dinner for the third time in a month, a quiet evening Hank had planned at home, just the two of them. Something shifted inside him. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a cold, precise feeling, like a knot tightening. Another late class, her text had read. He finished his own meal in silence, the quiet in the loft stretching long and empty. He looked at the time. It was 7 o'clock. Class, he thought, couldn't run that late. Without truly deciding, he found himself grabbing his keys. He stopped at their favorite Thai place, ordering her usual pad see ew. The container felt warm in his hand as he drove toward Midwestern University, the city lights blurring past his window. He told himself he was just bringing her dinner, but in the quiet hum of the engine, he knew he was checking up. The common area on the first floor of the business school building hummed with students, the air thick with the scent of coffee and ambition. Hank spotted Sarah near a cluster of couches, her head thrown back in laughter. She was surrounded by a small group, their laptops open, papers scattered across a low table. A tall guy, impeccably dressed even in casual clothes, sat beside her, his arm casually draped over the back of the couch, his posture angled intimately toward her. His dark hair was just a little too perfect. Sarah's laughter died in her throat when her eyes met Hank's. Her smile faltered, a flicker of something unreadable passing across her face, before she jumped up, smoothing her sweater. "Hank, what are you doing here?" Her voice was a little too loud, a little too surprised. He held up the takeout bag, the smell of ginger and soy wafting between them. "Thought I'd surprise you with dinner. You mentioned you had a late class." She managed a tight smile, then turned to the group. "Everyone, this is Hank Miller, my partner." She gestured to the tall guy. "And Hank, this is Chad Peterson. He just joined our cohort." Chad rose smoothly, extending a hand. He had a perfect practice smile, the kind Hank saw on venture capitalists who hadn't actually built anything. "Chad Peterson. Heard a lot about you, Hank." His grip was firm, almost aggressively so. Hank met his gaze, holding the takeout bag in his other hand. "Funny," he replied, letting a sliver of ice enter his voice. "I haven't heard anything about you." An awkward ripple of laughter, thin and forced, spread through the small group. Sarah's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Chad sold his last startup, Aura, for a pretty penny," Sarah interjected, her voice hurried, an explanation for Chad's sudden prominence. "He just joined our cohort this semester." "Aura," Hank acknowledged, nodding slowly. "Yes, an impressive exit. And modest, too. A rare quality in the valley." He kept his tone even, but the barb was clear. Chad's smile didn't waver, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. Chad turned his attention back to Sarah, ignoring Hank's comment. "Sarah's been a tremendous help with our strategy project, Hank. She has a brilliant mind for systems architecture, truly." He said her name with a casual familiarity that grated on Hank. "I know," Hank replied, his voice still level, flat. "That's why I invested in her education." He didn't elaborate. There was no need. The subtext hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Sarah visibly stiffened. "Well, we should probably get going," she said, her voice tight, suddenly rushing to gather her things. She mumbled quick goodbyes to her classmates, practically dragging Hank by the arm. Once they were out of earshot, walking down the echoing hallway, she yanked her arm free. "What was that about?" she hissed, her eyes blazing. "What was what about?" Hank asked, genuinely surprised by her sudden anger. "That whole alpha male territorial thing with Chad. You were so condescending." "I was meeting your study group," Hank countered, trying to keep his own voice calm. I shook his hand. I acknowledged his company. "You embarrassed me in front of my classmates, Hank." Her voice was a furious whisper. "He's a major player, someone I need to impress." "I brought you dinner, Sarah," Hank reminded her, the warmth of the takeout bag, a stark contrast to the sudden chill between them. "After you canceled on me for the third time this month." They ate in their loft that night in near silence. The Thai food, usually a comfort, tasted like ash. Her answers about her classes were clipped, monosyllabic. When he tried to talk about a particularly challenging deal at Prairie Plains, she picked at her food, then pulled out her phone, checking it repeatedly, her thumbs swiping with a restless energy. The quiet stretched, taut and uncomfortable. Finally, he couldn't help himself. He asked, trying to keep his tone neutral, almost conversational, "So, that group project, is that with Chad?" Her eyes flashed, suddenly alive with a raw anger. "Yes, with Chad and 4 other people, Hank. It's a study group, not a dating service." She slammed her fork down on the table, the clatter loud in the still room. She stood up, grabbed her plate, and strode into the kitchen, the tension radiating from her like heat. 10 minutes later, the bedroom door clicked shut. She was in bed early, angry. That was the first night in their relationship that we went to bed angry. It wouldn't be the last. The shifts became less subtle, more pronounced. Weekend trips without Hank were no longer explained away with hurried excuses. They were simply facts of her schedule. His calls went to voicemail more often than not. The word we had begun to vanish from her vocabulary, replaced by I and my. It was like watching a perfectly calibrated machine slowly, inexorably, veer off course. At a university networking event, one where Hank was Sarah's reluctant plus one, he found himself standing near a potted palm, nursing a lukewarm beer. Sarah was across the room, animatedly talking to a venture capitalist he recognized. Nearby, he overheard Chad Peterson, his voice resonating with an easy arrogance, speaking to another student. "Just a matter of time, really," Chad said, a low, confident rumble. "She's wasted on that VC robot. She needs someone who can match her creativity, her vision." Hank's hand tightened on his glass. He kept his back to them, listening, his jaw clenching. The other student, a young woman, asked, "So, Hank's actually funding her MBA?" Chad let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Consider it his parting gift to the tech world. He's investing in the woman who's going to help me build the next unicorn." A cold, precise fury ignited in Hank. His first instinct, primal and raw, was to walk over there to take Chad by the collar, to make him repeat those words to his face. But then, the investor in him, the cold and calculating part that thrived on data and strategy, kicked in. "Wait," he told himself. "Watch. Gather data as I would for any investment decision." He stayed put, letting the words sink in, hardening inside him. He returned to their loft that evening, the heavy quiet of physical presence. He found Sarah in the living room, laptop open on the coffee table, a pair of headphones on. Her face, illuminated by the screen, was alight with a soft, intimate laughter. "You're ridiculous," she was saying, her voice playful, hushed. "I'll see you tomorrow night." Hank stood in the doorway of the office, unseen. He heard a faint reply from the headphones, a low, familiar voice, Chad's voice. Sarah clicked the call off, pulling the headphones from her ears. She turned, startled to see Hank. Her smile, which had been so genuine moments before, faded a fraction. "Oh, hey," she said too brightly. "Just wrapping up with my study group." Hank nodded, his face a mask of polite indifference. "Rough night?" he asked. He pretended to believe her. Over the next few weeks, her schedule became a solid wall of study sessions, group projects, and networking events. There was no space for him. He tried once to bring up their early days, the hackathon, the late-night talks about quantum computing. "Remember when we built that CAD app?" he'd asked, trying to infuse warmth into his voice. Sarah had looked at him, her expression distant. "We've grown, Hank. We've evolved. We're not the same people." At another university function, a sterile alumni gala, Hank watched Chad at Sarah's side. Chad's hand rested casually on her lower back, a proprietary gesture. Sarah giggled at something he whispered, her head tilting back, her eyes shining. The primal urge to explode was stronger this time, a hot wave of betrayal washing over him. But still, he held back, focusing on the data, the precise angles of Chad's hand, the specific timbre of Sarah's laugh. The betrayal was building, a solid, heavy mass in his chest. The inevitable conversation happened on a Tuesday night. He found her packing a small suitcase, her back to him. When she turned, her eyes were red, wet. "I'm leaving you, Hank," she whispered, her voice breaking. "For Chad." She looked away, then back, tears streaming now. He gets me. He understands my vision. He's someone better." He stood in the doorway, his own face a blank slate. "The MBA?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. She flinched. "The MBA, it was an investment in my future, Hank. Not ours." The words, though delivered through tears, felt sharp, calculated, like a final blow. "The money," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. $200,000. She wrung her hands. "I'll pay you back. Eventually, when I can." The next day she was gone. The loft was too quiet, too spacious. Her side of the closet was empty. On his desk, tucked under a paperweight, was the picture he'd taken of the napkin. Infinite returns in the form of our shared future. It felt like a cruel joke now, a tangible reminder of a broken contract. The first few days after Sarah left were a blur of empty rooms and echoing silence. Devastation was a cold, heavy blanket, but soon the pain began to curdle into something else, a cold, clinical anger. It wasn't a hot, furious rage, but a steady, simmering heat that sharpened his focus, channeling his grief into a single, relentless purpose. He looked at the empty space on the counter where her coffee mug used to sit, and a precise, calculated resolve settled in. Hank dove into Chad Peterson's background. He didn't just Google him. He used the full professional resources of his network. Confidential databases, private industry reports, discreet inquiries through former colleagues in the venture capital world. He traced every public announcement, every archived press release. What he found confirmed his initial gut feeling. Chad's successful exits weren't always the shining victories the media portrayed. There was a pattern of opportunistic moves leveraging the hard work of others, taking credit for teams that had done the heavy lifting, then bailing out at the opportune moment. The impressive exit Chad had boasted about, was no different. Hank's research revealed it had been a distressed sale, a fire sale disguised as a strategic acquisition. There was significant, undisclosed technical debt, and the buyer had been desperate for market share, overlooking the underlying issues. Chad hadn't built a unicorn, he'd merely ridden one, then jumped off just before it collapsed. Now Chad was building something new. Synergy, a decentralized data exchange. He was already touting it as his next unicorn, a disruptive force that would revolutionize how data was bought and sold. Hank saw the irony immediately. Synergy was a direct competitor to Heartland Data Solutions, Sarah's former employer, the very company she had left to pursue her MBA. And Sarah? She was a key figure in Synergy's business development, pouring all her ambition and her newly acquired knowledge into Chad's project. The irony was a bitter taste. Hank began to pick apart Synergy, examining it with the same ruthless scrutiny he applied to any potential investment. He identified critical weaknesses: its reliance on unproven cryptographic algorithms, a shaky legal framework for data ownership in an increasingly regulated market, and a business model that seemed to prioritize hype over fundamental value. It was a house built on sand, meticulously disguised as solid ground. "Pay you back eventually," Sarah had said. The phrase echoed in his mind, a constant refrain. Hank decided he would accelerate that payback. He wasn't just hurt, he felt financially violated, his trust exploited. This wasn't just about a broken heart, it was about a broken contract, an investment gone sour. He started reaching out to his contacts, discreetly, subtly. "Just gathering market intelligence on this new player, Synergy," he'd say. "Heard some noise. Wanted to understand their true capabilities." He wasn't spreading gossip. He was gathering data, building a case. He knew he was crossing professional lines, engaging in a high-stakes game that could damage his own reputation if discovered. But the betrayal had consumed him, replacing caution with a cold, precise determination. He looked at the napkin again, the picture on his phone. Infinite returns in the form of our shared future. A mirthless smile touched his lips. He'd make sure she got her returns, all right, just not the kind she expected. He realized Sarah was completely blinded by Chad's charisma, by the shiny veneer of his ambition. She couldn't see the cracks, the fundamental flaws Hank so clearly identified. This was the difference between a real investor and a dreamer. He compiled a detailed dossier. Chad's full startup history, the real numbers behind Aura's sale, Synergy's technical vulnerabilities, its legal exposure. It was meticulous, thorough, every bit as detailed as a due diligence report for a multi-million-dollar acquisition. Chad had called him a VC robot. Hank would show them exactly what a robot could do. Midwestern skies might seem calm, but beneath the surface, complex calculations are always in motion. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Hank sat in his quiet loft, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator. On his screen, Synergy's white paper glowed, dissected into 1,000 pieces. He meticulously planned his attack, treating it like the most critical investment decision of his career, a surgical strike designed to achieve maximum impact with minimal collateral. His primary goal was clear: cripple Synergy's upcoming Series A funding round. Without that capital, Chad's next unicorn would be stillborn. He had identified key technical vulnerabilities. Synergy's decentralized architecture, while sounding innovative on paper, relied on a complex interplay of nascent cryptographic protocols that were unproven at scale. There were inherent scaling issues, latency problems, and fundamental security risks that had been glossed over. The white paper made grand claims, but his analysis of their internal prototypes, gleaned from leaked snippets and industry whispers, showed a system teetering on the edge of instability. Beyond the tech, there were legal loopholes. The concept of decentralized data ownership, while appealing, was a minefield of regulatory uncertainty. Data privacy laws were tightening globally. Synergy's model was a headache waiting to happen, a lawsuit in the making, and Hank knew exactly how to highlight those risks. His strategy wasn't about shouting from the rooftops. It was about whispers. He would use his influence, his carefully cultivated reputation as a discerning investor, to plant seeds of doubt among potential investors and industry analysts. A casual conversation here, an offhand remark there, a pointed question that would force them to look closer, to ask the difficult questions. He even considered how to anonymously leak his findings to trusted industry reporters or even directly to competitors, not with a flourish, but with the quiet precision of an insider sharing a grave concern. He understood the implications. By destroying Synergy, he would effectively destroy Sarah's career, her big ideas built on Chad's shaky foundation. He thought of her animated face, her ambition, the way she'd once described her dreams. A faint tremor of doubt ran through him. Was this justice or just bitterness? The question lingered, an uncomfortable companion in the quiet of the loft. He pushed it down. Justice, he decided, a reckoning for a broken contract. He knew this path would isolate him. Colleagues might look at him differently, whispering about a partner at Prairie Plains who pursued personal vendettas. But the sting of betrayal, the financial and emotional cost, had consumed him. He felt he had no choice. He had given her everything, and she had taken it, weaponizing his investment for a rival, for a man who openly mocked him. He refined the narrative. It wasn't just about Synergy's flaws. It was about Chad Peterson's pattern of questionable ethics, his track record of smoke and mirrors. He would frame it as protecting the integrity of the tech investment landscape, a civic duty for a seasoned investor. His own reputation at Prairie Plains Investments, built on years of rigorous due diligence and solid returns, was his most potent weapon. When Hank Miller raised a red flag, people listened. His first move was subtle, almost imperceptible. He drafted an anonymous email to a trusted industry contact, someone who valued discretion and integrity. In it, he posed a hypothetical scenario: a company with a decentralized data exchange model relying on unproven cryptography, with significant legal ambiguities in its IP and privacy framework. He asked for their assessment, their gut feeling on such an investment, knowing the contact would connect the dots. He resolved never to directly confront Chad or Sarah. There would be no shouting, no public accusations. He would let the consequences speak for themselves. The dish, he mused, is best served cold, not hot. After sending the email, he leaned back, watching the screen, waiting for the first ripple in the water, for the delicate dance of whispers to begin. The whispers started small. Hank's hypothetical questions, carefully planted, began to circulate through the tightly knit world of venture capital. Investors, naturally cautious, started asking their own questions. Have you looked into their cryptography protocols closely? What about the legal framework for data ownership in a truly decentralized model? The sentiment, subtle at first, began to shift. A faint tremor of unease replaced the initial buzz around Synergy. Synergy's Series A roadshow began, a meticulously planned tour of Ashbarm of investor meetings. But the meetings weren't going as smoothly as Chad had planned. Potential investors, now armed with Hank's insights, were asking pointed, informed questions, questions that Chad and Sarah struggled to fully answer. The veneer of innovation began to crack under the pressure of genuine scrutiny. Then came the due diligence reports. Hank's analysis proved devastatingly accurate. The reports, conducted by independent firms, confirmed many of his concerns. The scaling issues, the unproven tech, the regulatory minefield. Irreconcilable was the word often used. Through his network, Hank heard fragments of the fallout. Sarah was growing frustrated. "She's losing her shine, Hank," a contact reported, his voice low, almost sympathetic. "Struggling to defend the technical side. No, you can't hold it together like she used to." The mental image of Sarah, once so confident and articulate, now faltering, brought no joy, just a cold validation. Meanwhile, an investigative tech journalist, known for his relentless pursuit of truth, had received an anonymous tip. The tip led him down a rabbit hole, digging into Chad's past, unearthing the real story behind Aura, and meticulously dissecting Synergy's grand claims. The article, when it finally hit, was devastating. It exposed Chad Peterson as a serial exaggerator, a showman who consistently overpromised and underdelivered. It laid bare the severe technical and legal risks of Synergy, calling it a house of cards built on vaporware. The details were precise, the evidence irrefutable. Synergy's Series A funding round collapsed within days. Major investors pulled out, citing irreconcilable due diligence concerns. The public humiliation was swift and brutal. The article went viral, shared relentlessly across tech blogs and social media. Chad, once the darling of the new money, was now publicly ridiculed, branded a charlatan. Sarah, as Synergy's head of business development and its most visible public face, was heavily implicated. The article questioned her judgment, portraying her brilliance as either naive or complicit. Her name was now irrevocably linked to Chad's failure. News of the internal strife at Synergy began to leak. Chad and Sarah, the power couple with the shared vision, were fighting. He blames her for not selling hard enough. A source close to the defunct startup whispered to Hank's contact, "Says she couldn't close the deals, despite all his genius." The carefully constructed facade of their partnership crumbled, revealing the raw, resentful truth beneath. The final hammer blow came in the form of legal action. Disgruntled early investors from both Aura and Synergy, emboldened by the expose, threatened lawsuits against Chad for misrepresentation and fraud. His empire, built on hype and borrowed ambition, was now facing a slow, painful dismantling. Hank observed it all from a distance. The chaos, the public disgrace, the slow, agonizing destruction of what they had tried to build. A sense of cold satisfaction settled in, precise and unwavering. But beneath it, a profound emptiness lingered, an ache that no amount of vindication could truly fill.